Sarah had always embraced the predictable rhythms of her daily life with a certain comfort, but recently, each day seemed to bleed indistinguishably into the next. The realization that she was craving something drastically different, something exhilarating, hit her abruptly one quiet Tuesday morning. By the afternoon, the walls of her office seemed to close in on her, the ticking of the clock a relentless reminder of the excitement she was missing. It was then she hatched a plan, not just to break free from the monotony, but to dive headfirst into an adventure. Las Vegas, a city she had long dreamed of visiting, a place where spontaneity and excitement thrived, beckoned to her. The only hurdle was getting to the airport. Her car was in the shop and time was ticking. On a whim, she called Tom, a friendly acquaintance known for his laid-back attitude and generosity. "Hey, Tom, I'm in a bit of a bind here. Can you give me a ride to the airport? There's a family emergency," she lied, the fabrication slipping out more easily than she expected. Tom, ever the helpful friend, didn't hesitate. "Of course, I'll be there in 15 minutes, he responded, his voice calm and reassuring. As they drove, the city passing by in a blur, Sarah's heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nerves. The lie sat uncomfortably at the back of her throat, but the thrill of her impulsive decision spurred her on. Glancing at Tom, who focused on the road, she wondered what he would think of her true plans. Would he see this sudden urge to flee to Vegas as reckless, or would he understand her need for a sudden jolt of life? Halfway to the airport, with the hum of the engine low in the background, Sarah turned to Tom, her decision made. "Tom, there's no family emergency," she started, her voice unsteady. Tom looked over, his expression one of confusion. "I'm actually going to Vegas just for the weekend. I want to invite you to come with me." The words tumbled out, each one more liberating than the last. Tom's initial shock gave way to a slow smile. "Vegas, huh?" he said, the idea settling in. "What's the catch?" His tone was light, teasing, the edges of excitement creeping into his voice as the shock wore off. "No catch. Just two friends, escaping life for a bit," Sarah replied, the relief flooding through her as she smiled back. "It'll be fun, I promise. A weekend we'll never forget." For a moment, Tom was silent, his gaze returning to the road. Then, with a nod, he said, "Let's do it. Let's go to Vegas." His words were spontaneous, a mirror of her own desires, sealing their sudden pact. As the airport drew closer, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The adventure ahead promised not just escape, but a chance to redefine her boundaries, to rediscover joy in the unexpected. With Tom by her side, ready to dive into whatever Vegas threw their way, Sarah felt certain that this weekend would indeed be one they would never forget. Tom's mind raced as he processed Sarah's proposal. The idea of jetting off to Vegas on a whim was both thrilling and daunting. The mundane routine of his daily life suddenly seemed even more colorless against the vibrant backdrop of an impromptu Vegas adventure. Yet, the practical side of him kicked in, weighing the responsibilities he'd be leaving behind, albeit only for a weekend. He glanced at Sarah, her eyes alight with excitement and anticipation, her spontaneous spirit infectious. "Sarah, this is crazy," he finally said, his voice tinged with disbelief, yet a smile beginning to form on his lips. "I mean, Vegas? Just like that?" He shook his head, a laugh escaping him. It was the kind of laugh that acknowledged the absurdity of the situation, but also hinted at a growing excitement at the possibility of actually going through with it. Sarah nodded, her smile widening. "Yes, just like that. Why not? When was the last time you did something just because it was fun, not because it was scheduled or planned?" Her challenge struck a chord with Tom. He realized it had been too long since he'd last embraced spontaneity. The routine had become his comfort zone, and suddenly, the idea of stepping out of it was exhilarating. "You're right," Tom conceded as he signaled and took the exit towards his apartment instead of continuing to the airport. "Let's do it. But let me pack a bag first. And I suppose we should at least think about where we'll stay and what we'll do when we get there, right?" Back at his apartment, the reality of their impromptu trip began to sink in. They quickly gathered essentials, clothing for the weekend, toiletries, chargers, and a few other necessities. Between packing, Tom and Sarah laid out some basic ground rules for their trip. They agreed to share expenses, keep each other informed, and most importantly, to make the most out of their unexpected adventure without any expectations. Also, let's agree to be open about what we want from this trip, Sarah added as she zipped up her small carry-on. If there's something specific you want to do in Vegas, let's talk about it. And if we need space or alone time, that's okay too. We're friends, and I want this to be fun for both of us without any pressure. Tom nodded, appreciative of her thoughtfulness. Agreed. I think as long as we communicate and respect each other's needs, we'll have a great time. With their bags packed and a rough plan in place, they headed back to the car. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a palpable buzz of anticipation. As they drove towards the airport, the lights of the city seemed to shine a bit brighter, the night filled with promise and the allure of Las Vegas just a plane ride away. Their spontaneous trip felt like the beginning of an unforgettable adventure, a break from the norm that both of them so desperately needed. The highway stretched out before them, a ribbon of possibilities leading straight to Las Vegas. With each mile they covered, the weight of their ordinary lives seemed to lighten, replaced by a thrilling sense of freedom and anticipation. Sarah turned up the volume on the radio, and the car filled with the sounds of classic rock, the perfect soundtrack for their escape. "Remember the first time you heard this song?" Sarah asked over the music, a mischievous smile playing on her lips as she sang along to a particularly energetic guitar solo. Tom laughed, joining in, not caring about hitting the right notes. "I think I was in college. Music like this always seemed to play at parties or late-night drives with friends." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, jumping from favorite concerts to the most memorable road trips they had each taken. With each shared story, they discovered more common ground, their past experiences and current hopes weaving a tapestry of newfound friendship and deeper connection. As they crossed state lines, the iconic bright lights of Las Vegas began to appear on the horizon, casting a glow that seemed to fuel their excitement. "We're almost there," Tom said, his voice filled with anticipation. "Any first stops you want to make when we get there?" Sarah thought for a moment, her eyes reflecting the neon lights as they drew closer to the city. "I think just walking the strip, soaking it all in. Maybe catch a show or try our luck at a casino. What about you?" "I've always wanted to see one of the big magic shows they have here. And definitely some blackjack," Tom replied, his enthusiasm matching hers. They talked about the shows they'd heard about, the magic acts that seemed to defy reality, and the legendary performances that had made Vegas famous. As they entered the city, the energy seemed to pulse through them. The streets were bustling, alive with people from all walks of life, each drawn to this city of lights and dreams. They parked the car at their hotel, a towering structure with glittering lights and a promise of luxury. "Here we are," Sarah said, taking a deep breath as they stepped out of the car. The air was filled with sounds of laughter, music, and the distant cheers of winning bets. They checked into their hotel, dropped off their bags, and headed straight for the heart of Vegas. Their first steps on the Strip were like walking onto a movie set, everything larger than life. They strolled along side by side, taking in the sights of elaborate fountains, dazzling light shows, and replicas of famous landmarks from around the world. It was a sensory overload in the best possible way. As the night deepened, they found themselves at one of the high-end casinos, drawn in by the sound of slot machines and the general thrill of the game. Tom exchanged some cash for chips at the blackjack table, and Sarah watched, amused by his concentration. "This is surreal," Sarah whispered as they cashed in some winnings, a stroke of beginner's luck making her grin. Tom nodded, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Best decision ever," he agreed, his arm brushing against hers as they moved on to the next adventure Vegas had to offer. The night was young, and so was their escapade, each moment building on the last, creating memories that would redefine their ordinary lives into something extraordinary. As they stepped out from the casino, the night air was crisp, carrying with it the buzz of the city that never sleeps. "What's next on our Vegas bucket list?" Tom asked, his voice full of excitement as they walked along the strip, neon lights casting colorful shadows on their path. "Let's see a show. Something only Vegas can offer," Sarah suggested, her eyes catching a billboard advertising one of the most popular Cirque du Soleil shows. They agreed instantly, buying tickets from a nearby booth. As they entered the theater, the atmosphere was electric, an eclectic mix of tourists and locals all gathered for the spectacle. The show was a mesmerizing blend of acrobatics, music, and fantasy, an otherworldly experience that seemed to pull them deeper into the magic of Las Vegas. As performers soared overhead, Sarah glanced at Tom, his face alight with wonder. This shared moment of awe seemed to weave them closer together, each act, each leap and spin echoing the thrill of their spontaneous adventure. After the show, they wandered through a recreated Parisian street in one of the hotels, complete with a small-scale Eiffel Tower. "I can't believe we're here," Tom murmured, looking around at the elaborate decor. "A few hours ago, we were just heading to the airport, and now, look at us." "Yeah, it's like we're in a completely different world," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with excitement and a hint of something deeper, more reflective. She was struck by how natural it felt to be here with Tom, exploring and experiencing new things together, as if they'd been meant to take this trip all along. They decided to cap off their night with a late dinner at one of the hotel restaurants, choosing a quiet table with a view of the strip. Over gourmet burgers and fries, they shared stories from their pasts, discovering more about each other's lives, dreams, and occasionally touching on deeper, more personal themes. At one point, Sarah found herself opening up about her recent feelings of stagnation, how she'd felt lost in the monotony before this trip. Tom listened intently, nodding in understanding. "Sometimes, you just need to do something different, something wild to break out of that," he said, his hand briefly touching hers across the table. As the conversation flowed, Sarah felt an unexpected sense of vulnerability. She realized she was enjoying Tom's company far more than she had anticipated. There was an easy chemistry between them, a connection that seemed to deepen with every laugh and shared confession. However, amidst the laughter, there was a pang of guilt that tugged at her conscience. She was married, after all, and what started as an innocent adventure was veering into territory she hadn't intended to explore. The night ended with a quiet walk back to their hotel. The streets were less crowded now, the earlier cacophony fading into a gentle hum of late-night revelers and the distant sounds of music. As they reached their rooms, Sarah felt a mix of contentment and confusion. "Thanks for a great night, Tom," she said, her smile sincere but her heart heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Thank you, Sarah. Today was incredible," Tom replied, his eyes holding hers a moment longer than necessary before he turned to his door. As Sarah entered her room, the reality of her actions began to settle in. What had started as a thrilling escape was now a complex web of emotions and decisions. She knew the next few days would require careful navigation, not just of the vibrant streets of Las Vegas, but of her own heart and the choices she faced. The morning greeted them with the promise of new adventures in the vibrant city. Today, their plan was to dive deeper into the Las Vegas experience with a series of exciting activities. They started with a lavish brunch at one of the Strip's renowned hotels, where the buffet spread was a gastronomic delight, featuring everything from gourmet omelets to sushi and decadent desserts. As they savored their meal, they chatted about what lay ahead. "How about a helicopter tour?" Tom suggested, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "We could see the Grand Canyon from the sky." Sarah loved the idea, thrilled by the prospect of seeing such a majestic natural wonder from such an incredible vantage point. The helicopter ride was exhilarating. As they soared above the vast landscape, the breathtaking views of the Grand Canyon and the surrounding desert were unlike anything they had ever seen. The experience was not just a visual feast, but an emotional one too. High above the ground, with the world spread out beneath them, the sensation of freedom was overwhelming, and it stirred something deep within them both. Feeling inspired by the expansive views and the rarefied air, they found themselves opening up about more personal subjects. Sarah confessed how she often felt constrained by her day-to-day routine, her life sometimes seeming small when compared to the grandeur of the world available to explore. Tom shared similar feelings, expressing a desire for more meaningful experiences beyond his usual scope of work and daily habits. The intensity of the conversation led them to acknowledge the undeniable attraction that had been simmering between them since the trip began. As the helicopter gently descended back towards the city, their hands found each other, their fingers intertwining naturally. The physical connection seemed to seal the emotional one, and by the time they landed, the energy between them was palpable. Flushed with excitement from the day's adventures and their emotional revelations, they agreed to continue the evening with dinner and a show, unwilling to let the magic of the day fade. Dinner was at a chic restaurant with a view of the Bellagio fountains, an enchanting backdrop that complemented the romantic mood. As they watched the water dance to the rhythm of the music, their conversation deepened, exploring not just dreams and desires, but the realities of their situations. It was there, amid the splendor of cascading water and music, that they shared a passionate kiss. The kiss was a culmination of the day's emotions and adventures, a moment of surrender to the connection that had been growing between them. It was an acknowledgement of attraction and possibility, though tinged with the complexity of their individual lives back home. As the night drew to a close, they walked back to their hotel, hand in hand, the streets of Vegas buzzing around them. The excitement of the city seemed to echo their own turbulent emotions, full of life, possibility, and the thrill of the unknown. The vibrancy of the evening slowly gave way to a more reflective atmosphere as they made their way back to the hotel. The energy of Las Vegas still pulsed around them, but inside, Sarah felt a growing sense of introspection. The excitement of the day's adventures with Tom, culminating in their kiss, was exhilarating, yet it brought with it a sobering realization of the complexities they would eventually have to face. Sarah broke the comfortable silence between them. "Tom, what are we doing?" Her voice was a mixture of confusion and concern. It's incredible, but it's also a lot to process." She was trying to reconcile her feelings for Tom with the responsibilities and commitments waiting for her back home. Tom nodded, his expression serious, mirroring her conflicted emotions. "I know," he replied, his tone thoughtful. "Today was amazing, and honestly, being with you has felt more right than anything has in a long time. But I'm also aware that we're both stepping into uncharted territory." They found a quiet bench along the strip, the bright lights of the casinos casting a surreal glow on their faces. Sitting down, they faced each other, the noise of the city fading into the background as they focused on their conversation. "We need to decide how we handle this when we get back to real life," Tom continued. "I don't want this to be just a Vegas thing, but I also don't want to cause you any trouble." His voice conveyed his genuine concern for her well-being, beyond the spontaneous joy of their getaway. Sarah took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing on her. "I feel the same," she confessed. "I don't want to end this when we leave Vegas. What we have feels too important to just be a brief escape, but we also can't ignore the fact that I have a life, a husband." The acknowledgement of her marriage hung heavily between them. They both knew the gravity of what that meant and the potential pain it could cause. "Maybe we should just enjoy the rest of our time here," Sarah suggested after a pause, her voice softer. "We can figure out the rest later when we're not caught up in the Vegas magic." It was a temporary solution, a way to put off the inevitable challenges they would face, but it seemed like the only viable option at the moment. Tom agreed, relief evident in his expression. "Yes, let's not ruin this experience with worries about the future. We have a few more days. Let's make the most of them." He reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. They stood up, their decision made, to live in the moment and delay the tough conversations until reality could no longer be kept at bay. As they walked back to their hotel, hand in hand, the city around them seemed to encourage their resolve to make every remaining minute count, offering them a respite from the inevitable decisions that lay ahead. The last evening in Vegas arrived quicker than they had anticipated, the days blurring into a whirlwind of excitement and new experiences. For their final night, they chose a restaurant high above the city, where the windows offered panoramic views of the sparkling Vegas skyline. The atmosphere was ripe with the kind of elegance and promise that only a city like Vegas could offer, and they both dressed for the occasion, aware of the significance this night held. Over dinner, they shared a bottle of wine, the rich, deep flavors mirroring the intensity of their conversations. They reminisced about the highlights of their trip, each memory laced with laughter and the thrill of shared secrets. But as the meal progressed, the conversation inevitably deepened to more serious matters. "I've been thinking about what this all means," Sarah started, her voice steady but her hands nervously playing with her napkin. "About us, about what happens next." She paused, looking out at the city lights. Tom took a deep breath, his gaze meeting hers across the table. "I've been thinking too," he admitted. "What we have is incredible, Sarah. I haven't felt this alive in years, but I also know we live in the real world, with real consequences." They discussed their individual dreams and aspirations, and how perhaps they could align in a future they might share. The possibility of taking what they had discovered about each other and themselves and turning it into a life together was both tantalizing and daunting. "As much as I want to ignore everything else and just focus on us, we can't," Sarah said, her voice tinged with regret. "We need to think about how we can make this work, about the changes we'd need to make." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "I know. And whatever we decide, I want you to know that these past few days with you have changed me. I want to find a way to keep you in my life." The rest of their dinner passed with a blend of sweet reminiscences and contemplative silences, each lost in thoughts about the future. After paying the bill, they took a slow walk along the strip, the night alive with energy and the promise of endless possibilities. As they walked, they held hands, an easy silence between them punctuated by shared glances and smiles. The chaos of the city around them felt distant as they focused on the reality of their connection, the undeniable bond that had formed in such a short time. Their final night in Vegas was bittersweet, filled with the joy of the present moment and the uncertainty of the future. They made their way back to their hotel, each step heavy with the knowledge that the next day would bring a return to their regular lives. But for those few hours, they allowed themselves to simply be together, to enjoy the magic of Vegas and the rare connection that had turned a simple trip into an unforgettable journey. The drive back was enveloped in a heavy silence, a stark contrast to the laughter and music that had filled their trip to Vegas. Each mile closer to home brought with it the looming presence of reality, the life and responsibilities that awaited their return. Tom kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind was far from the traffic and street signs passing by. Sarah sat beside him, her gaze often drifting out the window, watching the landscape transition from the barren desert to the familiar urban sprawl. After some time, Tom broke the silence. "We need to talk about what this means," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "About us and whether we can really make this work back in the real world." Sarah turned to look at him, her expression somber. "I know," she replied. "I've been thinking about that a lot. What we shared was incredible, but it wasn't just a vacation from reality. It felt real, and that scares me because it means making some big decisions." They discussed the practicalities, how they could maintain their connection while navigating the complexities of their existing commitments. Tom mentioned the possibility of relocating, of finding a job closer to her, or even her moving to his city. Each option was fraught with challenges, but behind his words was a clear willingness to make sacrifices for the chance to explore what they had begun. Sarah listened, her heart torn between the desire to dive into this new beginning and the responsibilities she couldn't just abandon. "I need to think about my husband," she admitted, the words painful to say but necessary. "We have to consider the people we might hurt, not just ourselves." Tom nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I get that," he said. "I don't want us to be reckless with other people's lives. Maybe we need some time to figure out our own situations before we can really think about us. As they neared the city, the conversation shifted to what the next steps would be once they returned. They agreed to give each other some space to deal with their respective personal matters while keeping the lines of communication open. "Let's not rush this," Tom suggested. "If we're going to do it, let's make sure we do it right." Pulling up outside Sarah's house, the finality of the moment settled over them. They were home, back to where their adventure had started, yet everything felt different. They shared a long, tight embrace, a silent promise to hold on to what they had found together. "Goodbye, Tom," Sarah whispered as she stepped back, reluctant to turn away. "See you soon, Sarah," Tom replied, his voice steady but his eyes revealing the uncertainty that lay ahead. As Tom drove away, Sarah watched his car disappear down the street, the weight of their parting heavy in her heart. She knew the days to come would be filled with difficult conversations and decisions, but she also carried with her the hope of a new beginning, however uncertain it might be. The road ahead was unclear, but it was a road they had chosen to explore together, no matter where it led. Sarah sat quietly in her living room, the memories of Vegas still vivid in her mind. She pondered over each moment, each decision that had led to the unexpected journey with Tom. It had started as a daring escape from her routine, a thrilling adventure, but had transformed into something profoundly introspective, making her question her life's choices and her own happiness. Her thoughts drifted to Tom, to the honest and raw conversations they had shared. The connection they had experienced was undeniable, filled with potential and promise. Yet, here she was, back in the reality of her life, facing the complexities of her marriage and the repercussions of her actions. The trip had not just been an escape, but a mirror, reflecting parts of her life she had ignored or suppressed. Tom, on his part, was facing his own set of reflections and decisions. The journey with Sarah had opened up new possibilities and feelings he hadn't anticipated. He considered the changes he would need to make to explore this new path, the sacrifices and adjustments that would be necessary. Was he ready for such significant changes? Could he move forward knowing the stakes and the potential for upheaval in his own life? After some days, the space they had given each other felt sufficient to allow for personal reflection and decision-making. Sarah picked up her phone, her fingers hesitating just a moment before dialing Tom's number. The call was a bridge, reconnecting their shared experience with their separate realities. "Hi, Tom," Sarah started, her voice a mix of nervousness and resolve. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "Me too," Tom replied, his voice carrying a seriousness that matched hers. They discussed what they had been through, not just the fun and escape of Vegas, but the deeper revelations about their lives and desires. Sarah shared her introspections about her marriage, her need for fulfillment, and her realization that changes were necessary, whether they led to her staying in her marriage or moving on. Tom listened, then shared his own thoughts. He expressed his willingness to make changes, but also his reservations about the impact on all involved. "I want to make sure that whatever steps we take are considerate and thoughtful, not just for us, but for everyone affected," Tom explained. Their conversation was a dance of possibilities and boundaries, a careful navigation of their feelings and the realities they each faced. They agreed to keep talking, to explore their options slowly and respectfully, understanding that the path they were considering could alter their lives significantly. As they ended the call, a plan began to form. They would meet to talk further, to see a counselor together, and to explore the feasibility of a future together in a structured, responsible way. The call had reaffirmed their connection, but also underscored the need for careful consideration of the next steps. Sarah felt a cautious optimism as she hung up the phone. The journey ahead was daunting, filled with potential risks and rewards. But she felt prepared, knowing that whatever the outcome, the path would be one chosen with care, honesty, and respect for everyone involved. Tom and Sarah decided to meet in person to discuss their feelings and potential paths forward. Sitting across from each other in a quiet corner of a local coffee shop, the familiarity of their connection was palpable. Yet there was an undercurrent of the serious decisions that lay ahead. They began by sharing what each had reflected on since their return from Vegas, the personal growth they had experienced, and their thoughts on how they could potentially integrate this new dynamic into their lives. Sarah started by expressing her gratitude for the trip and for Tom's presence, which had acted as a catalyst for her self-discovery. "This journey made me realize how much I've been missing passion and excitement in my life," she admitted, "but it also highlighted the importance of making decisions that aren't just about seeking thrill, but about building a sustainable and fulfilling future." Tom nodded, understanding her perspective deeply. "I feel the same way," he responded. "Vegas showed me that life is about taking chances, but it's also about knowing which chances are worth taking. It's one thing to feel alive, but another to build a life on those feelings that are grounded in reality." They discussed the practical aspects of what a future together might look like, considering everything from relocation to engaging in a long-distance relationship, until they could sort out their individual circumstances. They agreed that if they were to take any steps forward, it would need to be done with a structured plan that considered their careers, families, and social responsibilities. "The key for us is going to be communication," Tom emphasized. "Whatever we decide, we need to promise to keep the lines open, to be honest, and to ensure we're both moving at a pace we're comfortable with." Sarah appreciated his maturity and foresight. "Absolutely," she agreed. "And I think it might be wise for us to see a relationship counselor to help guide us through this transition. We're charting unfamiliar territory, and professional guidance could really help us navigate it wisely." As their meeting drew to a close, they felt a mix of emotions, from the excitement of a new beginning to the anxiety of the unknown. They decided to take things slowly, allowing each step to be thoughtful and deliberate. They parted with a deep, meaningful hug, a promise to each other that they were committed to exploring this new path together, carefully and respectfully. As Sarah walked away, she felt a surge of hope. She had learned a lot about herself through this unexpected adventure, about her desires, her limits, and her capacity for change. She was ready to take on the challenges that lay ahead, feeling fortified by the growth she had experienced and the partnership she was building with Tom. Their future might not be certain, but their commitment to face it together was a testament to the profound impact of their shared journey to Vegas. A journey that started as a spontaneous getaway and evolved into a pivotal chapter of their lives.